So thanks, Ross, for inviting me to present, and good morning, good afternoon, and evening to everyone. So what I am going to do in this talk is giving you an overview of the links between stress at work and well-being and unethical and counterproductive work behavior. And in particular, I will discuss a little bit the importance of negative emotions in this process. And further, I want to link to what already Ross has discussed, and linking the emotions with moral disengagement mechanisms. And finally, I would like to spend a little bit of time to understand how we can prevent counterproductive work behavior and how can we withstand moral disengagement. So this is a kind of broad overview of some important theory from work psychology that have been very useful for understanding why people sometimes misbehave. The stressor emotion model is a model developed by Paul Spector and Susie Fox, and they integrate two different theories. One is a seminal theory on frustration and aggression. So this is a model that has been developed back in the 1940s, and the idea is that when people are working on something and in certain situations they cannot actually achieve their work goals or doing what they actually were aiming to, the feelings of frustrations might be central in creating this kind of link between feelings of frustration and then a behavioral response that will be an aggressive type of response, especially when in situation in which there is less likelihood of being punished. So this is a model in which they just put together and study the interplay between this affective response to frustration and the aggressive one. Now, on a different theory, and it's about stress. We all know about the importance of stress and the consequences of feeling of stress and overwhelming on people's health and well-being, but also in relation to their behavior. So the theories, and when we talk about stress, we can consider the work from Lazarus as a seminal work. And here the idea is that stress is a process that is a function of the way people appraise the events, their environment, and their capabilities and their resources. So the response, a strain a response, so when people are starting to feel depleted and not having enough resources, this is a situation in which we see the events, the challenges, the demands from a work environment. We perceive that we do not have enough resources to cope with them, and this creates this feeling of strain. So what Spector and Fox have done is actually putting together the frustration aggression theory with the theories on stress, and they highlighted that unethical work behavior, counterproductive work behavior, represent an inefficacious behavioral response of strain. So it's a way of actually managing the feeling of stress and strain, and so these negative feelings. So what I wanted here to highlight, and with work from these colleagues, is the central role of negative emotions. So in these slides, you can see the model in which we have the stressors, and that represents possible the demands from the work environments in terms of workload, conflicts, and constraints, and they can act as creates feelings of frustration, but it's also about anger, fear, anxiety, that this in a way increases possibly the likelihood of engages in counterproductive work behavior. So however, we started to think about, but unethical behavior in the workplace cannot just be conceived as these forms of reactive, hot, impulsive form of aggression. We all know that threats in the work environment and unethical behavior can be premeditated. So people sometimes have to think through is not just the response to feelings. And so, as Ross before has shown, we started to think about the role of moral disengagement. Now, moral disengagement is a set of social cognitive mechanisms. And as Ross has said before, they actually help individual, not necessarily by being aware, to reframe unethical behavior in a way that it seems a positive behavior. And they actually help individual behave in unethically without feeling distressed, guilty, and without the needs for repairing. So moral disengagement really helps resolving the possible dissonance between what we profess and what we actually do. And this is why this mechanism is very important for understanding why otherwise good people might behave unethically in the workplace. And these are examples of what we mean by moral disengagement. And you can see here some of the items that we use for measuring. And the work from Bandura started by looking at teenagers and forms of antisocial behavior in young adulthood and during life. And we started to look at this type of mechanisms in the working context. Now, what we have demonstrated is that moral disengagement has a very important role in linking together the stress that we mentioned and was mentioning before, and the negative emotion and counterproductive work behavior. So we might say that moral disengagement actually mediates, and this is the work that we have published some years ago, and these are forms of stressors and demands from the working place, and increases the likelihood of experiencing this negative emotion that actually in turn increases moral disengagement and in turn increases the likelihood of behaving unethically towards colleagues, but also towards the organization. We have done this work also in the hospital setting and in particular by looking at nurses, and we found exactly the same, that nurse moral disengagement actually is linked to unethical behavior in the working context. And then we also started to think about, but when we talk about stressors in the workplace, we also know that nurses are target of aggression from third party, so from patients and their families. So, and we also know from the literature how relevant these events are for individuals in terms of fear, anger, sadness, or broad range of emotions. And so we started to think about, but can we think about of a link between being target and then become perpetrator? We already know from psychological research also in kids in relation to bullying that some forms of bullying, so people that actually become perpetrator, may have a history of being target of bullying. So we started to think about, and we also know from the literature in work psychology, the spiral of aggression and incivility. So we looked at the in nursing context, and these are the results from a study that we conducted in Italy, in a hospital in Italy. So nurses that were target of aggression, they experience more fear and anger and sadness. And unexpectedly, we all found the important role of fear. So the experience of fear and anxiety increases the likelihood again to be more prone to moral disengagement and then engage, unfortunately, in unethical and clinical misconduct. So this study highlights how relevant and how important it is to definitely prevent and improve the working conditions. So definitely the primary and prevention, so by looking and working on the sources, is pivotal. And we know about how negative emotions and moral disengagement can be particularly relevant. So we started to think about how can we prevent? How can we start understanding better how can moral disengagement can be in a way stopped? As I said before, moral disengagement is a social cognitive, and also, as Ross before has highlighted, it can be learned. So if other people in my work context actually misbehave and justify their misconduct, this might become a way of thinking. However, people have self-regulatory capabilities, and we cannot think that because they experience negative emotion, then automatically they will morally disengage and misbehave. So we wanted to study better what might be the capabilities that are needed to self-regulate themselves. And then this can help understanding the prevention of moral disengagement. And what we have started studying is the role of self-efficacy beliefs. So self-efficacy is about people perception of their capabilities to be able to do specific things. And so we thought about moral self-efficacy as the set of beliefs about the capabilities to self-regulate in challenging situations and be able to self-reflect. And so we thought about self-efficacy because we strongly believe that unless people feel and perceive themselves to be able to confront themselves with difficult situation, if they do not believe, well, it will be very difficult that they will behave differently. So we defined moral self-efficacy by looking at self-reflection, and Ross before mentioned the importance of people's capabilities to actually think about themselves and looking at what they do and trying to fix mistakes, reflect how to be better. And then other capabilities are more the proactive. So I feel I am able to do the right things even in difficult situation. And the inhibitory one is actually stopping doing or inhibiting the possible temptation to do something wrong and refuse, for example, to break a rule, even if this might have a positive consequences. So just to highlight, we actually demonstrated that moral self-efficacy is very relevant in withstanding moral disengagement. So individuals, employees, high in moral self-efficacy, even if their moral disengagement is high, actually this possible, let's say, thought in terms of reframing this misbehavior is not translated in counterproductive work behavior. So we found that high level of moral self-efficacy is very useful to prevent the translation of possible moral disengagement thoughts and mechanism in behavior. However, if individuals do not feel capable of self-reflect and self-regulate themselves, this might have an impact in the misbehavior. So in one of the practical implication of this work that we have just finished this study is actually developing trainings. And here the idea is that we want to develop training so that people can become better individuals and be aware about their processes and the possible temptations. And this is the work that we are doing in developing specific business ethics trainings based on realistic scenarios. So to sum up, Unethical behavior, counterproductive work behavior can be a response to strain in frustrating work environment. It's a possible way people and employees cope with the negative emotion experience. It's very important to try to improve the working environment and primary prevention, going on the sources of stress. But we also know that personal characteristic might have a very important role and in the way people appraise the work environment and they face their challenges. And moral disengagement can really be powerful in allowing otherwise good employees to misbehave. But as I said, we can definitely prevent this. So this is a kind of source and the science behind this presentation. Thanks, and hope you have found this presentation helpful.